The crowd swarmed the shopping mall, each person focused solely on pushing forward in the frenzied Black Friday rush. Jake tapped his foot impatiently, brows furrowed in annoyance as yet another rude elbow jostled past. He had woke before dawn, hoping to beat the masses, but it seemed the whole town had the same idea. Finally edging past the registers, Jake surveyed the bustling aisles for his first stop, the electronics store. A glint of reflected light caught his eye, drawing his gaze down the corridor. There, lingering by the food court, stood a stark figure. Even from a distance, Jake noticed the man's bald scalp and the intricate tattoo snaking up his neck. Something about his intense stare unsettled Jake, but he blinked and the man disappeared into the throng. Shaking off the weird encounter, Jake began browsing the latest gadgets. Soon, though, that prickling feeling of being watched returned. He swiveled to find bald man peering over from the next aisle, expression inscrutable. Their eyes met for an instant before the man jerked away, melting once more into the shoppers. Jake hurried on, unnerved. Surely it was a coincidence. This was a public place after all. By the sporting goods store, however, their bald man loitered again, expression disturbingly familiar. Their eyes locked and bald man smiled slowly, recognition seeming to flash in his eyes. Panicked, Jake darted off, heart pounding. The instances piled up. Bald man appearing out of nowhere at each of Jake's stops, from the toy emporium to the bookstore. Each lingering look left Jake more on edge, certain now he was being followed. Finally, he burst from the final clothing outlet, flustered and anxious to get home. But there at the exit, bald man stood waiting, gaze steady. Jake froze, heart in his throat. After a tense moment, bald man inclined his head mockingly and strode away. Shivering, Jake rushed to his car and sped off, constantly checking the rear view, but seeing no sign of bald man. Yet he couldn't escape the chill enveloping him as darkness fell, or the sense he was being watched still. Two blazing taillights taunted Jake through the misty rain, staying stubbornly on his tail through the twisting back roads. He stomped harder on the gas pedal, swerving wildly around each bend, but to no avail. The heavy truck mirrored his every move, prowling relentlessly behind. Jake fumbled for his phone with shaking hands, jabbing the home button repeatedly to no response. As the headlights closed in, panic engulfed him completely. He cried out, nearly losing control on a sharp turn. At last, with an electronic whir, his phone blinked to life, and Jake jammed his dad's number with urgency. "Dad, help!" he gasped when the call connected. Between ragged breaths, Jake scrambled to explain bald man's dogged pursuit through the stormy night. "Stay calm, son. I'm on my way," his father responded firmly. "Drive to the mile marker and wait there. I'll handle this." With his father's reassurance, Jake summoned the last shreds of courage to maintain the chase. Just a few minutes longer, he had to keep going until help arrived. As the marker light glowed into sight, relief flooded through him, unlike to be crushed by blaring horns. Brakes screeched against the asphalt as a huge truck rammed straight into Jake's blind spot. Jake wrenched the wheel just in time to avoid a crushing collision, but lost control completely on the slick road. His car fishtailed wildly before crunching sideways into a ditch. Dazed and winded, Jake shook off the haze to see bald man emerge from the wrecked truck, eyes blazing with menace. His heartbeat spiked as bald man stalked over, fists clenched. But before the man could reach him, a familiar engine roared in the distance. Headlights spotlighted bald man mid-advance, freezing him in his tracks. Jake's father leapt out, brandishing a shotgun with a steely gaze. "Get back in your vehicle, now!" he commanded in a voice like iron. Bald man hesitated, eyes darting between the rifle's barrel and Jake trembling in his seat. After a long moment, he turned reluctantly and climbed back into the totaled truck. Its engine choked to life and limped away into the night, back tires squealing. Jake's father lowered the gun and ran to his son's aid. "It's all right, son. You're safe now. Let's get you home," he soothed, helping Jake from the wreckage. As they drove off into the receding storm, Jake shuddered uncontrollably, replaying the night's harrowing cat and mouse chase. He buried his face in his hands, questions swirling endlessly with no answers in sight. Who was this mysterious bald man, and what did he want? That night, fitful dreams tormented Jake's every attempt to rest. Bald Man's grin haunted his waking moments as well, that predatory smile chilling him to the core. When dawn finally broke, it brought little comfort. Jake paced his bedroom restlessly, while worrying questions swirled. Downstairs, his father spoke in harsh tones on the phone, relaying the ordeal to the sheriff. "We need answers, Ted. This man is clearly dangerous, stalking my son." Hanging up curtly, he strode to the door. "Stay here and lock it. I'm going to have words with our friend." Jake peered through the blinds as his father's truck disappeared down the lane, dread pooling in his gut. Time crawled endlessly, each minute tormenting him with worst-case scenarios. Finally, tires crunched in the driveway once more. Jake threw open the door to see his father returning, expression stony, and in the passenger seat, Bald Man. Heart lurching, Jake froze as the two men exited, Bald Man eyeing him cautiously. His father beckoned Jake over firmly. "It's all right, son. I have him restrained. Let's hear what he has to say." Hands cuffed behind his back, Bald Man stepped forward under his father's watchful gaze. "I apologize for scaring you, boy. That was never my intent," Bald Man began, voice low and gravelly. "But I had to be sure it was you after all these years." Jake stared, bewildered. "Years." Bald Man sighed deeply, meeting his eyes. 15 years ago, I was a different man. Back then, your name was Jacob too." As Bald Man began to recount a harrowing tale from the past, Jake listened in disbelief. 15 winters ago, a tragic accident had claimed the lives of Bald Man's wife and young son. Jacob, distraught with grief. Bald Man had spiraled into alcoholism and violence. But one night, fueled by rage and sorrow, he had snapped completely. The ensuing details shocked Jake to his core. Bald Man described with raw emotion how he'd exacted revenge on those responsible for the accident in a brutal rampage. 2 innocent lives had been lost that night by his hands. The couple in the other vehicle. Horrified, Jake stared at the man, finally understanding his fixation. But one question remained. The men stared at each silently, weighed down by heavy revelations. At last, Jake spoke in a small voice. "But why come after me?" Bald Man sighed wearily. "When I saw your face that first time, it was like seeing my boy again. I had to know if it was truly you, reincarnated after all these years of penance. But I went about it all wrong, scaring you instead. Can you find it in your heart to forgive an old fool's madness?" Jake shuddered, clutching his arms as if to shield himself from the painful past, yet gazing into Bald Man's remorseful eyes. He knew only emptiness and loss remained. "I understand your pain," he replied softly, "but we must move on from here. No good comes from clinging to ghosts." Bald Man nodded, throat bobbing. In that moment, Jake glimpsed the lonely, grief-stricken man beneath, and felt only pity. His father stepped forward, placing a comforting hand on Jake's shoulder. "It's over now, son. Why don't you head inside? I'll wrap things up here." As Jake turned to leave, Bald Man spoke once more. "Thank you, Jacob. You've given me the closure I needed." With a small smile, he climbed into the police car that had pulled up, driving off into the setting sun. Inside, Jake sank onto the couch with a heavy sigh. His father joined him, draping a warm arm around his shoulders. "You did well handling that bravely. I'm proud of you," he said gently. Jake leaned into the embrace, taking solace in his father's strength. Though shadows of the past still lingered, out there the future beckoned, bright and full of promise once more. At last, he felt ready to let go and move forward, the healing process beginning anew each dawning day.